Three social media pranksters targeted a disabled man in Aurelius Gardens Park, seeking views and viral fame. Instead, they found themselves face-to-face with Kyrion Thaelar, one of the most decorated Navy SEALs in modern warfare history. What happened next would expose a dark underbelly of social media exploitation, unite a divided community, and remind everyone that true strength lies far deeper than physical appearance. Sometimes the most dangerous person isn't the one throwing punches, but the one who's learned to win battles without them. If you're enjoying this story, make sure to hit subscribe, because tomorrow's episode uncovers an even more shocking tale of hidden heroes among us. Now tell us in the comments, where are you watching from? The autumn wind whispered through Aurelius Gardens Park, rustling fallen leaves across well-maintained paths as Kyrion Thaelar wheeled himself toward his usual spot, near the century-old oak tree. His weathered hands moved with practiced efficiency, each motion purposeful and precise, habits formed through years of training that no amount of time could erase. The park stood peaceful save for distant children's laughter and the occasional jogger passing by, nodding respectfully at the quiet man in the wheelchair. Through the corner of his eye, Kai noticed three young men entering the park, their expensive camera equipment and practiced swagger marking them as something other than casual visitors. He recognized their leader, Riker Wraith Nixon, from local news coverage about his viral prank channel that had recently drawn criticism for increasingly aggressive stunts. Behind him, Calix Shade Meridian carried a high-end camera, while Astraeus Void Soren scanned the park, presumably looking for potential targets. The Shadow Squad, as they called themselves, had amassed millions of followers by orchestrating elaborate pranks that often crossed the line into harassment. Their latest videos had grown increasingly controversial, with local authorities receiving numerous complaints about their tactics. But social media platforms seemed reluctant to act against a channel generating such high engagement rates. Kai's trained eye caught subtle details others might miss: the way they moved in practiced formation, how they assessed potential camera angles, their careful scanning for witnesses or security cameras. The same predatory behavior he'd observed in very different circumstances, half a world away, and several lifetimes ago. Dr. Indira Vasari had warned him about this during his last VA hospital visit. "They're targeting vulnerable people," she'd said, showing him videos on her tablet. "Veterans, elderly, disabled, anyone they think won't fight back. It generates more views that way." She'd been trying to convince him to avoid the park until authorities took action, but Kai had simply smiled. Some battles needed to be fought, even if others couldn't see why. The trio's path took them closer to his position, their movements becoming more purposeful. Through the oak's shadows, Kai watched Nixon pull out his phone, already recording as he approached. The young man's face wore what he probably thought was a friendly smile, but Kai recognized it for what it was: the grin of a predator who thought he'd found easy prey. "Yo, what's good, my man?" Nixon called out, his voice carrying the exaggerated enthusiasm of a performer. "We're doing this awesome charity thing today, helping out people in need, you know what I'm saying?" Kai kept his expression neutral, his hands relaxed on his wheelchair's arms, but every sense was alert. Behind Nixon, his companions had split up, taking positions that spoke of rehearsed coordination rather than random movement. Calix raised his camera, while Astraeus moved to block the most direct escape route, tactics that had probably worked well on previous targets. "Not interested," Kai replied simply, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded elite teams through the world's most dangerous operations. Something in his tone made Nixon pause briefly, but the lure of potential viral content proved too strong. "Come on, bro, don't be like that. We're trying to help." Nixon stepped closer, his smile growing more predatory. "Unless you're too proud to accept charity? Is that what this is about?" Through his earpiece, Calix's voice carried clearly, "We're live, boss. Comments are blowing up already." Kai's mind raced through options, evaluating angles and positions just as he had during countless operations. The situation was escalating, but not in the way these young men expected. Through the park's entrance, he noticed Elowen Wraith, the groundskeeper, reaching for his phone. Good. Witnesses were always useful when dealing with predators, even those who hid behind cameras instead of weapons. "Last warning," Kai said calmly, his weathered hands remaining relaxed on his wheelchair's arms. "Walk away." Nixon's smile turned cruel as he moved to grab the wheelchair's handles. "Or what? You'll roll away real fast?" What happened next would reshape not just 3 lives, but an entire community's understanding of strength, respect, and the true meaning of warfare in the digital age. Sometimes the most dangerous person in any situation isn't the one making threats, but the one who knows exactly how many ways the situation could end, and is prepared for all of them. The hunt wasn't over. It was just beginning. Time seemed to slow as Nixon's hand reached for the wheelchair, a moment Kyrion Thaelar had seen play out countless times before. Not in this peaceful park, but in theaters of war where split-second decisions meant the difference between life and death. The familiar calm of combat awareness settled over him, muscle memory from years of special operations taking over. Through his peripheral vision, Kai noticed Elo and Wraith had moved closer, phone raised, documenting everything. The groundskeeper's presence was both witness and warning. Whatever happened next would be recorded from multiple angles. In the digital age, warfare wasn't just about physical confrontation. It was about controlling the narrative. 15 million views last week, Nixon boasted to his live audience, his hand now gripping the wheelchair's handle. Today, we're teaching someone about humility. Behind him, Calix adjusted his camera angle while Astraeus maintained his blocking position, their coordination betraying experience in cornering targets. What they didn't notice was how Kai's breathing had shifted, controlled and measured, or how his eyes constantly tracked minute details. Escape routes, improvised weapons, potential civilian positions. These weren't conscious thoughts but ingrained habits, products of training so intensive it became instinct. "You know what your problem is?" Nixon continued, playing to his audience. "You think being in that chair makes you special, makes you untouchable, but real life doesn't work that way, does it?" Kai's mind flashed back to his last conversation with Caius Ghost Theron, his former SEAL teammate just 2 days ago. "They're getting bolder," Ghost had warned, showing him clips from Shadow Squad's recent videos. "Last week they reduced an elderly veteran to tears. Police won't act because technically nothing's illegal about being an asshole with a camera." The memory shifted to Commander Octavian Valorn's voice during SEAL training, words that had shaped countless missions. "The most dangerous opponent isn't the one making threats, it's the one calculating odds, waiting for the perfect moment to strike." A small crowd had begun to gather at the park's edges, drawn by the confrontation. Kai noticed Dr. Vasari among them, her expression a mix of concern and anger. She'd seen too many veterans struggle with civilian life, seen how vulnerability could be weaponized by those seeking fame at others' expense. 300,000 watching live, Calix announced, excitement evident in his voice. "Comments are going crazy, boss. They want to see what happens when charity gets rejected." Nixon's grip tightened on the wheelchair. Time for a little lesson in humility. Maybe a nice ride around the park will change your attitude? His followers had dubbed these karma pranks, supposedly teaching moral lessons to those they deemed deserving. What they couldn't see was how Kai's position had shifted slightly, microscopic adjustments that would mean nothing to civilians, but would have sent warning signals to any trained operator. His hands remained relaxed on the armrests, but his weight distribution had changed, preparing for movement that decades of warfare had perfected. "You've got options," Kai said quietly, his voice carrying that same calm authority. "Walking away is still one of them." Through the gathering crowd, he spotted Officer Thalion Kestri arriving, drawn by concerned calls from park visitors. The police officer kept his distance, assessing the situation with professional detachment. "Options?" Nixon laughed, playing to his audience. "Only option I see is you taking this ride we're offering, unless you're going to roll away real fast." His followers in the live chat erupted with laughing emojis and encouragement, digital witnesses to what they thought was harmless entertainment. What none of them realized was that Kyrion Thaelar had spent 15 years in environments where split-second decisions meant life or death. The wheelchair wasn't a limitation. It was just another tactical consideration, one he'd adapted to with the same precision he'd once applied to underwater demolitions and hostile territory extraction. Last chance, Kai offered, his tone making several observers pause. There was something in his voice, an authority that seemed at odds with his vulnerable position. Even Aurelius shifted uncomfortably, picking up on subtleties his companions missed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Or what? Nixon's smile turned predatory as he began to pull the wheelchair backward. You'll call for help? File a complaint? Face it, old man, you're just content for our channel now. Through the crowd, Naya Silvari had arrived, the community activist already documenting everything with grim determination. She'd been building a case against Shadow Squad's escalating harassment, gathering evidence of their impact on the community. What was about to happen would give her more material than she'd ever expected. Kai's mind calculated angles, positions, and potential outcomes with machine-like precision. He noted how Calix had moved to capture the perfect shot, how Aurelius maintained his blocking position, how Nixon's balance was compromised by his grip on the wheelchair. All weaknesses, all opportunities, all factors in an equation these young men didn't even know existed. 500,000 live viewers, Calix announced triumphantly. This is going viral for sure. He was right about one thing. What happened next would indeed go viral, but not for the reasons they expected. Sometimes the most important battles aren't won with force, but with precise calculation, patience, and the perfect moment to reveal that the predator has become the prey. The hunt wasn't just about physical confrontation anymore. In the digital age, it was about message, about narrative, about showing the world that true strength often hides in plain sight. And Kyrion Thaelar was about to remind everyone why he'd been one of the most effective operators in SEAL history. Not because of his physical prowess, but because he understood that the most devastating victories often came without throwing a single punch. The autumn wind picked up, scattering leaves across the gathering scene, nature's own dramatic backdrop to a confrontation that would soon reshape not just 3 lives, but an entire community's understanding of power, respect, and the true meaning of strength. What happened next would be replayed millions of times across social media platforms, analyzed in slow motion, debated in comment sections, and eventually used in law enforcement training seminars about the dangers of underestimating people based on appearances. Nixon's attempt to move the wheelchair triggered a sequence of movements so smooth, so precisely executed, that many viewers would later claim the footage had to be edited. In one fluid motion, Kai released the wheelchair's brakes, used Nixon's own pulling force against him, and pivoted the chair with expert precision. The momentum sent the prankster stumbling forward, his grip on the handles forcing him to bend awkwardly. "Whoa!" Calix exclaimed, camera steady despite his surprise. "Boss, you okay?" But Kai wasn't finished. As Nixon struggled to regain his balance, the wheelchair seemed to move with impossible grace, its occupant demonstrating a mastery of physics and leverage that spoke of years of specialized training. Within seconds, Nixon found himself off balance, his wrist locked in a grip that appeared gentle but held him completely immobile. "Here's your first lesson," Kai said quietly, his voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. "Strength isn't about what you can force others to do. It's about understanding leverage, both physical and moral." Through his earpiece, Nixon could hear his live chat exploding with activity. The comments had shifted from mocking encouragement to shocked disbelief, as their target demonstrated capabilities far beyond their expectations. "Let him go!" Aurelius moved forward, abandoning his blocking position, but froze as Kai's gaze met his. There was something in those eyes, something that spoke of experiences far beyond their understanding. "Your friend isn't in danger," Kai assured him, maintaining the control hold with minimal effort. "But he is learning an important lesson about consent and respect. Aren't you, Mr. Nixon?" Officer Kestry had moved closer, but maintained his distance, recognizing something in Kai's handling of the situation that spoke of professional training. Through the crowd, Dr. Vasari watched with a knowing smile. She'd seen firsthand how her patient's disabilities hadn't diminished his capabilities, only changed how he applied them. "You don't understand," Calix protested, still filming. We're just creating content. People love this stuff." "Content?" Kai's voice carried a weight that made several observers shiver. "Is that what you call terrorizing elderly veterans? Harassing disabled civilians? Making people fear visiting their own public spaces?" Naya Silvari moved through the crowd, her own camera documenting everything. "This is exactly what we've been warning about," she called out. "The escalating pattern of harassment, the targeting of vulnerable individuals." But her words cut off as she noticed something unusual. Despite the situation, Kai's control of Nixon remained gentle, professional. There was no anger in his movements, no desire to humiliate or harm. This wasn't revenge, it was instruction. "1 million viewers," Calix announced, his voice uncertain now. "But they're not laughing anymore." "Because they're recognizing truth," Kai replied, slightly adjusting his hold as Nixon tried to twist free. "Real strength isn't about dominating others. It's about protecting those who can't protect themselves." Through the gathering crowd, Elowyn Wraith continued recording, capturing a moment that would soon challenge millions of viewers to reconsider their understanding of disability, strength, and respect. The groundskeeper had seen many things in his years tending Aurelius Gardens, but nothing quite like this. What are you?" Nixon managed, his bravado cracking as he realized just how completely he was controlled by the man he'd thought was an easy target. "Someone who learned the hard way that physical ability isn't the measure of a person's worth," Kai answered. He glanced at Officer Kestry, who nodded in understanding. "The question is, what are you going to become after this moment?" In the distance, sirens approached, more police responding to calls from concerned citizens. But Kai knew the real battle wasn't about physical confrontation. It was about changing perspectives, about teaching lessons that would reach far beyond this park. "Your channel," he continued, maintaining the control hold with practiced ease, "has been promoting a dangerous message. That it's okay to hurt people for views. That someone's vulnerability makes them a target for entertainment." Calix lowered his camera slightly, the first sign of doubt crossing his face. In the live chat, viewers were sharing their own stories now. Tales of being harassed, of feeling afraid in public spaces, of watching loved ones become targets for online mockery. "But today," Kai's voice carried clearly through the park, "you've helped demonstrate something important. That appearances can be deceiving, that true strength often hides in plain sight, and that actions have consequences beyond likes and views." With precise control, he released Nixon, who stumbled back, rubbing his wrist. The hold hadn't caused pain, but it had demonstrated just how completely he'd been at someone else's mercy. Exactly what his pranks had done to countless others. "Your choice now," Kai said as more police vehicles arrived. "Continue down this path or learn from this moment, because next time the person you target might not be as gentle in their response." Officer Kestry stepped forward, his expression grim. "We've received multiple complaints about harassment," he announced. "I think it's time we had a formal discussion about your activities in this community." But Kai's attention had shifted to the gathering crowd, particularly the elderly man he recognized as a fellow veteran who'd stopped visiting the park after being targeted in an earlier prank. The man's eyes held a mixture of vindication and renewed confidence. The hunt had taken an unexpected turn. What had started as another attempt at viral entertainment had become a moment of community transformation. Sometimes the most important victories weren't won through force, but through demonstration, showing both predator and prey that the world wasn't as simple as they'd thought. As Officer Kestry began taking statements, Kai noticed Dr. Vassery approaching, concern mixing with pride in her expression. She'd understood from the beginning that his regular visits to the park weren't just about enjoying nature, they were about standing guard, about being present to protect others who might become targets. The autumn wind carried distant thunder now, nature's own commentary on a confrontation that would soon reach far beyond Aurelius Gardens. Because in the digital age, every lesson had the potential to go viral. Every moment of truth could become a catalyst for change. And Kyrion Thaelar had just delivered a masterclass in true strength, one that would be shared, studied, and remembered long after the leaves had fallen from the ancient oak tree that had witnessed it all. The video of the confrontation exploded across social media platforms with the force of a digital tsunami. Within hours, Aurelius Gardens and Thaelar's hidden hero were trending nationally, as millions shared and commented on the footage from multiple angles. But in the immediate aftermath at the park, a different kind of revelation was unfolding. Officer Kestri's initial questioning had taken an unexpected turn when he'd quietly asked Kai about SEAL team operations in classified locations. The police officer's own military background had helped him recognize certain techniques that weren't taught in civilian self-defense classes. "Senior Chief Thaelar," Kestri said softly, using Kai's former rank. "I served with Echo Company, 2nd Battalion. Your extraction of the diplomatic team in Kandahar, that mission saved my best friend's life." Kai nodded slightly, accepting the recognition while maintaining his focus on the broader situation. Around them, the park had become a hub of activity. News vans were arriving, drawn by the viral video's rapid spread and the community's long-simmering tensions over Shadow Squad's activities. Dr. Vasari had moved to examine Nixon's wrist, her professional obligations overriding her personal feelings about his actions. "No damage," she announced, her tone clinical, "just like I'd expect from someone trained in control techniques designed to subdue without injury." Nixon sat on a park bench, his usual confident demeanor shattered. His phone buzzed constantly with notifications as his channel's subscribers tried to make sense of what they'd witnessed. The comment section had become a battlefield between those defending prank culture and others sharing their own experiences of harassment. 2 million views and climbing, Calix reported, his voice hollow. But the response, it's not what we usually get. He scrolled through his phone, reading comments that increasingly condemned their past actions. "They're finding our old videos, boss. The one with the elderly veteran, the homeless shelter prank. They're seeing them differently now." Astraeus had moved apart from his companions, his expression troubled. As a former junior ROTC member, he'd recognized something in Kai's movements that spoke of serious military training. "We really screwed up," he muttered, watching more police cars arrive. Naya Silvery was in her element, coordinating with other community activists who'd been documenting Shadow Squad's pattern of harassment. "This isn't just about one incident," she explained to a gathering news crew. "It's about how social media can be weaponized to normalize cruelty for profit." Through the growing chaos, Kai remained calm, his wheelchair positioned near the old oak tree as he gave his statement to Officer Kestri. His mind tracked multiple conversations, noting how the narrative was already shifting beyond the immediate confrontation. "Sir," a young voice called out. A teenage boy had approached, his phone clutched nervously in his hand. I've been following their channel, laughing at their pranks. I never thought about how it felt for the people they targeted." Kai studied the boy, seeing genuine realization in his eyes. "Understanding that is the first step toward change," he replied. "What matters now is what you choose to do with that understanding." More park regulars had gathered, including several who'd avoided the area after becoming targets of previous pranks. Among them was Vietnam veteran Howard Mills, who'd stopped his daily walks after Shadow Squad had filmed him having a PTSD episode. "You did what we all wanted to," Mills said, his voice carrying years of buried anger. "Showed them that picking on people they think are weak isn't entertainment, it's cowardice." Dr. Vasari had moved to stand near Kai, her professional demeanor masking deep concern. "This attention," she warned quietly. "It could trigger episodes. Are you sure you're ready for what comes next?" Kai's slight smile carried years of experience. "Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones fought in broad daylight," he replied, with everyone watching. Through the crowd, Commander Octavian Vailorn appeared, his civilian clothes doing nothing to hide his military bearing. The former SEAL instructor had driven from 2 states away after recognizing his one-time student in the viral footage. "Still teaching lessons, I see," Vailorn commented, positioning himself to shield Kai from some of the media attention. "Though your classroom has certainly changed." "The principles remain the same," Kai responded. "Protect those who can't protect themselves. Stand guard against those who prey on the vulnerable. The only difference is the battlefield. Nearby, Calix was going through their channel's video archive, his expression growing more troubled with each clip he reviewed. "We've got hundreds of videos," he said to no one in particular. "Hundreds of people we harassed, humiliated, traumatized," Naya supplied, her tone sharp. "Finally seeing your content for what it really is." But Kai raised a hand, interrupting what could have become a heated exchange. "Recognition of past mistakes is valuable," he said. "What matters is what happens next." Officer Kestry had finished his initial report and moved closer. "We've got multiple harassment complaints on file," he explained. "The district attorney's office is interested in discussing a pattern of behavior that may constitute criminal harassment." Nixon looked up, fear finally breaking through his shock. "Criminal? But they're just pranks. We're entertainers." "No." Kai's voice carried quiet authority. "You're bullies who found a way to monetize cruelty. The question is whether you're willing to learn from this moment or continue down a path that ends in consequences far worse than embarrassment." Thunder rolled closer as storm clouds gathered over Aurelius Gardens. The weather seemed determined to add its own drama to a scene that had already transformed a quiet park into ground zero for a national conversation about social media ethics, respect, and the true nature of strength. As rain began to fall, Kai noticed how the gathering crowd naturally organized itself, veterans standing together, previous prank victims finding solidarity, young followers of the channel questioning their own online behavior. A community was reforming itself around a new understanding of power dynamics in the digital age. The hunt had evolved into something more complex than a simple confrontation between pranksters and their intended target. It had become a catalyst for change, a moment when millions of viewers were forced to confront their own role in a culture that celebrated cruelty as entertainment. And Kyrion Thaelar, who had once led elite teams through the world's most dangerous environments, found himself facing a different kind of battle. One fought not with weapons or tactics, but with truth, example, and the kind of strength that came from protecting others rather than dominating them. The storm that had threatened Aurelius Gardens finally broke, sending people scurrying for cover beneath the park's pavilions and ancient oak trees. But rather than dispersing the crowd, the weather seemed to create intimate pockets of conversation, each group processing what they'd witnessed in their own way. Under the main pavilion, Naya Silvari's laptop displayed a digital tsunami unfolding across social media platforms. The original confrontation video had spawned thousands of response videos, with people sharing their own experiences of online harassment and real-world pranks gone too far. "It's gone beyond viral," she explained to Officer Kestry, scrolling through endless notifications. "Major news networks are picking it up. Social media influencers are taking down their prank videos. There's even talk of new platform policies about harassment content." Nearby, Calix sat alone, methodically going through Shadow Squad's video archive with new eyes. His camera lay forgotten beside him, its memory now holding footage that would reshape not just his career, but his understanding of the impact content creators had on real lives. 3 years of videos, he muttered, watching clips that had once seemed hilarious, but now made his stomach turn. 3 years of hurting people for views. How did we not see it? "Because you weren't looking," Commander Valorn's voice carried across the pavilion. The former SEAL instructor had been observing everything with tactical precision. "Sometimes the hardest thing to see is the impact of our own actions." Through the rain, Kai wheeled himself between groups, his presence both calming and catalytic. Veterans who'd avoided the park for months emerged from their isolation, drawn by the example of someone who'd turned vulnerability into strength. "The chair isn't weakness," he explained to a young woman who'd been filming the entire incident for her disability advocacy channel. "It's adaptation, evolution. Like any tool, its effectiveness depends on the skill and intention of the user." Dr. Vasari moved between conversations, her medical training allowing her to spot signs of emotional distress among those who'd been triggered by the confrontation. She paused near Nixon, who sat staring at his phone as his social media empire began to crumble. "Your wrist will be fine," she said professionally. "But I'm more concerned about what happens next. Rapid loss of status and social validation can trigger severe psychological responses. Nixon looked up, his eyes hollow. Our sponsors are pulling out. 3 years of building this brand, and in 1 hour. He gestured helplessly at his phone, where notification after notification showed companies distancing themselves from Shadow Squad. Perhaps, Kai's voice carried clearly despite the rain. It's time to consider building something worth lasting. The conversation was interrupted by Elowen Wraith hurrying into the pavilion, his groundskeeper's uniform soaked. "You all need to see this," he said, pulling up a news website on his phone. "They've identified you, sir, your full military record. Well, parts of it that aren't classified." The gathered crowd pressed closer as details of Kyrion Thaelar's service began circulating online. Citations for valor, classified operations later declassified, training records that read like action movie scripts. But it was the more recent history that caught everyone's attention. "You've been here 3 years, Astreus said, reading from his phone. "Ever since. Since the incident that put me in this chair?" Kai finished calmly. "Yes, an IED in a place I can't name, during an operation that's still classified. But that's not the important part of the story." "What is?" Calix asked, looking up from his review of past videos. "What happened after? The choices we make when life changes everything we thought we knew about ourselves." Kai's gaze swept the pavilion, taking in faces that showed varying degrees of understanding. "Each of us faces moments that define us, not by what happens to us, but by how we respond." Commander Valorn stepped forward, his presence commanding attention. "Kyrion was one of the most effective operators I ever trained, not because of physical prowess, though he had that, but because he understood that true strength comes from protecting others, from standing between the predators and their prey." Through the rain, more people were arriving at the park. Local residents who'd seen the video, former targets of Shadow Squad's pranks, even other content creators grappling with their own role in digital culture. The pavilion became a kind of town hall, with conversations spanning from personal responsibility to platform accountability. "It's not just about pranks anymore," Naya observed, her laptop showing discussions spreading across social media. "People are questioning the whole culture of humiliation for entertainment, the metrics that reward cruelty, the algorithms that promote conflict." Officer Kestry, who'd been coordinating with other units, rejoined the group. "The district attorney wants to use this case as a precedent," he announced. "Establish clear legal frameworks for when online content crosses into criminal harassment." But Kai's attention had shifted to Nixon and his teammates, seeing something in their demeanor that spoke of a deeper struggle. "The hardest battles," he said, wheeling closer to them, "are the ones we fight with ourselves, when we're forced to confront the truth about our actions and choices." Nixon looked up, his influencer persona stripped away to reveal someone much younger and more uncertain. "How do you come back from something like this? When millions of people have watched you be everything you thought you were fighting against?" "The same way you handle any tactical situation," Kai replied, drawing from years of SEAL training. "Assess the damage, adapt your strategy, and most importantly, decide what mission you're really fighting for." Thunder rolled overhead as if emphasizing his words, but the conversations in the pavilion continued to evolve. Veterans shared stories of resilience and adaptation, their experiences finding new relevance in the digital age. Young content creators grappled with questions of ethics and responsibility. Community members began planning ways to reclaim spaces they'd surrendered to fear of harassment. The hunt had transformed into something none of them had expected, not a simple confrontation between pranksters and their target, but a catalyst for examining the very nature of power, respect, and responsibility in an interconnected world. And through it all, Kyrion Thaelar continued his quiet patrol of the gathering, just as he had done in war zones and classified operations around the world. Because sometimes the most important battles weren't won with force or viral videos, but with the patient work of helping others find their own strength. As evening approached, Aurelius Gardens had transformed into something between a community forum and a makeshift command center. The rain had eased to a gentle drizzle, and portable lights cast long shadows across gathered groups still processing the day's events. But beneath the surface conversations, deeper currents of change were beginning to flow. In one corner of the pavilion, Calix sat surrounded by hard drives containing years of Shadow Squad content. His hands trembled slightly as he copied files to a secure drive provided by Officer Kestry, evidence for the pending investigation into their pattern of harassment. Over 600 videos, he said, his voice hollow. I kept metrics on everything: views, engagement, ad revenue, but I never tracked how many people we hurt, how many lives we disrupted. Nearby, Astreus had removed his signature Shadow Squad jacket, the brand that had once been his pride now feeling like a mark of shame. His phone displayed his ROTC instructor's latest message. Sometimes, the hardest battles are fought within ourselves. Come see me when you're ready to talk. The most dramatic transformation, however, was unfolding with Nixon himself. The self-proclaimed king of pranks sat with Dr. Vasari, his carefully cultivated online persona crumbling as he watched real-time reactions to their channel's content being re-examined across social media. It was never supposed to go this far, he admitted, scrolling through comments that now condemned videos he'd once considered his masterpieces. We started with harmless jokes, but the algorithm, it rewarded escalation. More shock, more controversy, more cruelty, Dr. Vasari finished quietly. The metrics incentivized targeting the vulnerable because their reactions generated more engagement. From his position near the old oak tree, Kai observed these conversations while conducting his own quiet assessment. Years of special operations had taught him to read people, to spot the moments when genuine change became possible. Commander Valorn moved to join him, their positioning automatic, two operators maintaining optimal situational awareness, even in civilian settings. You've started something here, the former instructor noted. Something bigger than just stopping a few pranksters. Social media is just another battlefield, Kai replied, watching Naya Silvery coordinate with other digital rights activists. Different weapons, different tactics, but the same fundamental choice between protecting or exploiting the vulnerable. Through the evening mist, more vehicles were arriving. Not just local media now, but vans from major networks. The story had evolved beyond a viral video into something that touched nerves across the digital landscape. Senior Chief, Officer Kestry approached, his tone professional but respectful. The FBI's cyber division is interested in your perspective on digital harassment patterns. They're seeing similar tactics being used in more organized harassment campaigns. Before Kai could respond, a commotion near the park entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of young men wearing Shadow Squad merchandise had arrived, fans of the channel angry about their hero's apparent downfall. Their hostile energy radiated across the gathering. "See what you've done?" one shouted, phone raised to film the confrontation. Years of building something amazing destroyed by some wannabe victim who can't take a joke. The pavilion tensed, but Kai's calm voice cut through the growing hostility. Interesting choice of words, he said, wheeling forward. Amazing how? By teaching people that cruelty is entertainment? That someone's vulnerability makes them a legitimate target? The leader of the group faltered slightly, his phone wavering as he faced someone who radiated quiet authority even from a wheelchair. Behind him, his companions shifted uncertainly, their rehearsed bravado meeting something they hadn't expected. "It's just content," another fan protested. "Nobody really gets hurt." "Tell that to Howard Mills," Naya called out, stepping forward with her tablet. "Vietnam veteran suffered a PTSD episode during one of your harmless pranks. Or Sarah Chen, elderly grandmother knocked down during your mall panic prank. Or Marcus Rivera, homeless man humiliated for views." As she spoke, faces appeared on her screen. Real people, real consequences, real pain caused by what these young men had dismissed as mere content. The impact was visible in their expressions as virtual statistics became human reality. "This is the moment," Kai said, addressing not just the angry fans, but everyone gathered in the growing darkness. When each of you decides what kind of person you want to be, what kind of world you want to help create. From the pavilion, Nixon stood suddenly. His movement drew all attention as he walked slowly toward his defending fans. For a moment, tension spiked. Would he embrace their support? Try to salvage his online empire? "Take down the videos," he said quietly, addressing his most loyal followers. "All of them. The pranks, the reactions, the compilations. It's over." "But the channel," one fan protested, "was built on hurting people." Nixon cut him off. "I see that now. Maybe it's time we all did." The transformation playing out in Aurelius Gardens rippled across social media in real time. Hashtags shifted from #pranklife to #digital accountability. Comment sections that had once celebrated cruelty began filling with reflections on responsibility and impact. Dr. Vasari moved between groups, her professional eye noting how trauma and healing could spread through a community like ripples in a pond. "This is group therapy on a massive scale," she observed to Commander Valorn. "Forced confrontation with the consequences of normalized behavior." As night settled over the park, the portable lights created islands of illumination where different aspects of digital culture's reckoning continued to unfold. Content creators debated ethics and responsibility. Platform moderators shared challenges of balancing engagement with harm prevention. Veterans and former prank victims found validation and support. Through it all, Kyrion Thaelar maintained his quiet presence, a catalyst who had transformed from target to teacher. His wheelchair moved between groups with the same tactical precision he'd once used in combat zones, but his victories now were measured in changed minds rather than neutralized threats. "The hardest part comes next," he told Naya as they watched the ongoing transformations. "When the viral moment fades and the real work of change begins." But looking at the faces around them, Nixon confronting his past choices, Calix documenting evidence of their impacts, Astraeus reconnecting with his military values, and countless others beginning their own journeys of reflection, it was clear that something fundamental had shifted in Aurelius Gardens that day. The hunt had become a healing, the confrontation a catalyst, and a moment of potential humiliation had transformed into a masterclass in true strength and responsibility in the digital age. Dawn painted Aurelius Gardens in shades of gold as Kyrion Thaelar arrived for his usual morning patrol. In the 12 hours since the confrontation, the story had evolved in ways none of them had anticipated. The park had become ground zero for a nationwide conversation about digital ethics, responsibility, and the true meaning of strength. News crews had set up permanent positions near the old oak tree, their satellite trucks creating a technological forest at the park's edge. But it was the gathering near the central pavilion that drew Kai's attention, a mix of content creators, platform moderators, and digital rights activists engaged in intense discussion. "It's not just about pranks anymore," Naya explained, her laptop displaying trending topics across social media. "People are examining everything: reaction videos, public shaming channels, even those justice-served compilations. The whole ecosystem of profit from pain is under scrutiny." Calix, who hadn't left the park since yesterday's confrontation, was presenting his analysis of Shadow Squad's metrics to a group of platform safety researchers. His insider knowledge of how content algorithms rewarded escalating harassment had proven invaluable. "The system is designed to amplify conflict," he explained, showing graphs of engagement versus controversy. "We didn't start out trying to hurt people, but every time we pushed boundaries, the numbers rewarded us. More views, more ads, more sponsors." Dr. Vasari had established an impromptu counseling center in one corner of the pavilion, working with both former prank victims and content creators struggling with their role in digital culture. Her experience with trauma and recovery was finding new application in the digital age. "What we're seeing is a form of mass awakening," she told Commander Valorn as they watched the gatherings. "People realizing they've been both victims and perpetrators in a system designed to monetize human vulnerability." Through the morning mist, Kai noticed Nixon sitting alone by the park's small pond, his phone dark for perhaps the first time in years. The former Prank King's transformation had become its own viral story. Screenshots of his public apology and decision to delete the channel had sparked intense debate across platforms. "May I join you?" Kai asked, wheeling to a stop beside the bench. Nixon nodded, his usual confident persona replaced by genuine reflection. "I got a call from Marcus Rivera this morning," Nixon said quietly. "The homeless man we humiliated last month. He wanted to talk about restorative justice, about turning our platform into something that helps people instead of hurting them." Around them, Aurelius Gardens continued its transformation from local park to symbol of digital culture's reckoning. Officer Kestry was coordinating with cybercrime units from multiple jurisdictions, using Shadow Squad's case to establish new protocols for handling organized online harassment. "The FBI is particularly interested in the pattern recognition aspects," Kestry explained to a gathering of law enforcement officials. "How seemingly isolated pranks can form part of larger harassment campaigns designed to drive targeted groups from public spaces." Astreus had returned wearing his ROTC uniform, leading a group of young cadets in community service around the park. Their presence added another layer to the ongoing discussions about honor, service, and responsibility in both physical and digital spaces. "Everything we learn about leadership and duty applies online," he told his fellow cadets as they cleared debris from yesterday's storm. "The platforms might be virtual, but the impacts are very real." Near the media area, Naya was coordinating with digital rights organizations worldwide. The incident had become a catalyst for examining how different countries approached online harassment and content regulation. "Australia's looking at implementing new anti-harassment laws based on this case," she announced to the gathered activists. "The EU's Digital Rights Commission wants to study how we're building our community response network." Commander Valorn moved between groups with tactical precision, his decades of training finding new application in helping organize the growing movement. "In special operations, we learned that lasting change requires more than just winning battles," he explained to a group of platform moderators. "It requires transforming the environment that allowed threats to emerge." The morning's peace was briefly interrupted by the arrival of more Shadow Squad fans, but these were different from yesterday's angry defenders. They carried signs reading, "Content Creators for Change," and "Views aren't worth victims." "We've started a reform movement within the prank community," their leader explained to Kai. "Examining our content, our impact, our responsibility to our audiences. Your example showed us that true strength isn't about dominating others, it's about lifting them up." Dr. Vasari watched these interactions with professional interest, noting how trauma could become transformation when given the right catalyst. "They needed someone to demonstrate that standing against harassment isn't weakness," she observed. "That protecting others is the ultimate show of strength." As the morning progressed, Aurelius Gardens became host to an impromptu digital ethics conference. Content creators shared strategies for engaging audiences without exploiting vulnerability. Platform developers debated algorithm adjustments to reward positive community building over conflict generation. Law enforcement and legal experts discussed frameworks for addressing digital harassment. Through it all, Kyrion Thaelar maintained his quiet patrol of the gathering, his wheelchair moving with the same tactical precision he'd once used in combat zones. But his mission had evolved far beyond stopping a few pranksters. "The digital world isn't separate from the real one," he explained to a group of young content creators. "Every video, every comment, every moment of manufactured conflict creates ripples that affect real lives. The question is whether those ripples lift people up or tear them down." Nearby, Calix had set up a workshop on ethical content creation, using his experience to help others recognize and resist the incentives that pushed creators toward exploitation. "Engagement metrics don't measure human cost," he explained, showing analytics from their now-deleted videos. "We need new ways to measure success, new definitions of what makes content valuable." As morning turned to afternoon, Aurelius Gardens continued its evolution from battleground to classroom, from confrontation site to catalyst for change. The hunt that had begun with 3 pranksters targeting what they thought was an easy mark had transformed into a movement for digital accountability and ethical content creation. But Kyrion Thaelar, who had spent years hunting America's most dangerous enemies, knew that the real work was just beginning. Because sometimes the most important victories weren't won through force or viral videos, but through the patient work of transforming how people saw themselves and their role in creating a better world. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across Aurelius Gardens as the first signs of organized resistance to the growing movement began to emerge. A group of influential content creators had arrived, their expensive cars and professional security detail marking them as major players in the digital entertainment industry. Leading them was Victor "Viral King" Reynolds, whose network of prank and reaction channels generated millions in annual revenue. His arrival sent ripples through the gathered crowds, particularly among content creators who recognized the power he wielded in their industry. "Let's be real about what's happening here," Reynolds announced to the news cameras that immediately surrounded him. "We're watching years of creative freedom being threatened because one person couldn't take a joke. This isn't progress. It's censorship wrapped in virtue signaling." Kai observed from near the old oak tree, noting how Reynolds' security positioned themselves with professional precision. These weren't typical bodyguards. Their movement patterns suggested private military training, an interesting choice for someone who claimed to just make entertainment content. "It's starting," Naya muttered, her tablet displaying real-time reactions across social media. Major prank channels are mobilizing their audiences. They're framing this as an attack on creator rights and free speech. Through the gathering tension, Dr. Vasari continued her work with affected community members, though she kept a careful eye on the new arrivals. "This was inevitable," she told Commander Valorn. "Any system that profits from harm will fight to defend itself." Reynolds moved through the park with practiced showmanship, his camera crew capturing every moment. "Think about what you're really supporting here," he called out to the gathered creators. "Today it's prank videos. Tomorrow it's any content that might offend someone. Where does it end?" Nixon, still sitting by the pond, visibly tensed at Reynolds' approach. The industry titan had been his role model, the success story he'd tried to emulate. Now, seeing him in person, something felt different. "Riker," Reynolds greeted him with calculated warmth. "This isn't you, man. You built something amazing. Don't let them shame you into throwing it all away." But before Nixon could respond, Kai's wheelchair moved smoothly between them. "Interesting perspective," he said calmly. "That accountability equals censorship. That profit justifies pain." Reynolds' practiced smile flickered slightly as he faced the former SEAL. His security detail shifted positions, responding to subtle hand signals. "With all due respect, sir, you've become a symbol for something dangerous. A movement that threatens the livelihoods of thousands of creators." "Like Marcus Rivera's livelihood?" Calix spoke up, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet park. "The homeless man whose few possessions we destroyed for views? Or Sarah Chen's dignity? Or Howard Mills's peace of mind?" Officer Kestry moved closer, coordinating quietly with park security as the confrontation drew more attention. Through his earpiece came reports of more vehicles approaching, other major content creators arriving to support both sides of the growing debate. "You're missing the bigger picture," Reynolds argued, playing to the cameras. "We provide entertainment, escape, human connection. Yes, sometimes people get upset, but that's the price of creating engaging content." "The price?" Kai's voice remained steady, but those who knew combat could hear the steel beneath his calm. "Interesting choice of words. Tell me, Mr. Reynolds, how much do you make from your Prankster Empire network?" "My financials aren't relevant to this discussion." "Aren't they?" Naya stepped forward, her tablet displaying analytics. "Your network generates over 40 million annually, primarily from videos targeting vulnerable populations. Homeless people, elderly, disabled veterans, demographics your internal documents describe as high-value reaction subjects." Reynolds' composure cracked slightly. "Where did you get those documents?" "The same place we got these," Calix added, having worked through the night analyzing industry data. "Internal metrics showing how your network specifically trains creators to escalate harassment for maximum engagement, to identify and exploit vulnerable targets." The confrontation had drawn everyone's attention now. News crews jockeyed for position as Reynolds faced growing exposure of his operation's darker aspects. His security detail moved closer, their formation suggesting they were prepared for more than just crowd control. "You're threatening an entire industry," Reynolds warned, dropping the friendly facade. "There are people with serious investments in this space, people who won't stand by and watch their revenues disappear because of some misguided moral crusade." "Interesting priorities," Kai replied, his wheelchair positioning subtle but tactical. "Protecting revenue streams rather than human dignity. Tell me, how many lives is your profit margin worth?" Commander Thaelar had moved to support Kai's position, his own combat experience recognizing the signs of escalating tension. Around the park, other veterans and former targets of harassment pranks began forming a protective perimeter, an organic response to perceived threat. "This isn't over," Reynolds announced, signaling his team to withdraw. "The content creator community won't be bullied into submission by social justice warriors and triggered veterans." But as he turned to leave, Nixon suddenly stood. "Show them the hospital footage," he called out, his voice shaking but determined. Reynolds froze. "What did you say?" "The children's hospital prank, the one you said would make us legends." Nixon stepped forward, years of guilt finally finding voice. "Show them what your empire really is." The tension in Aurelius Gardens shifted as this new revelation rippled through the gathered crowds. Dr. Vasari moved closer to Nixon, recognizing the signs of someone finally confronting deep trauma. "The digital age's greatest weapon isn't harassment or pranks," Kai observed quietly, watching Reynolds' hasty departure. "It's truth, the ability to expose what happens in the shadows." But as Reynolds' expensive cars pulled away, everyone present understood that the real battle was just beginning. The movement born in Aurelius Gardens had struck at something far larger than a few viral pranksters. It had challenged an entire industry built on monetizing human suffering. The hunt had evolved into something none of them had expected. It wasn't just about stopping harassment or changing platform policies. It was about confronting a system that had turned cruelty into commerce, and the powerful interests who would fight to protect it. Evening descended on Aurelius Gardens as the implications of Nixon's revelation about the children's hospital incident sent shockwaves through social media. The park had become a command center for what was quickly evolving into a full-scale digital war against exploitation entertainment. Naya's laptop displayed an avalanche of new information as content creators, inspired by Nixon's confession, began coming forward with their own stories. Inside accounts of Reynolds' prankster empire painted a disturbing picture of an industry built on calculated cruelty. "It wasn't random," Calix explained, sharing internal documents with FBI cybercrime specialists. "They had targeting algorithms, vulnerability metrics, even psychological profiles to identify people most likely to give marketable reactions to harassment." Dr. Vasari had moved her impromptu counseling center to a larger pavilion as more former content creators sought support. "They recruited young influencers deliberately," she noted, working with a teenage girl who'd been part of Reynolds' network. "Looked for those desperate for fame, malleable enough to ignore their conscience." Kai wheeled between groups with tactical precision, his military training finding new application in coordinating what had become a multi-front campaign. Command Thaelar worked alongside him, turning the park into an operations center for digital accountability. "Think of it like psychological warfare," Thaelar explained to gathered activists. "They weaponized social media algorithms, turned human suffering into entertainment, and built a billion-dollar industry around it." Officer Kestri arrived with new information from the cybercrimes unit. "Reynolds' network isn't just about pranks," he reported grimly. "We're finding connections to data harvesting operations, manipulation campaigns, even coordinated harassment of journalists who investigated them." Through the evening darkness, Nixon sat with investigators, finally unburdening himself about the children's hospital incident. His hands shook as he pulled up archived footage on his phone. "It was supposed to be our masterpiece," he said, his voice hollow. "A fake bomb threat to film reactions. Reynolds said it would make us legends. We didn't know there were kids in intensive care that the evacuation would." He couldn't finish, but the footage spoke for itself. Chaos in hospital corridors, terrified parents, medical equipment disconnected in panic. The video had never been released, but its creation marked a turning point that had led to this moment. 7 children had their treatments disrupted, Naya read from hospital reports. 3 suffered complications, all for a video that would have generated millions of views. The revelation galvanized the movement. Content creators who'd been hesitant to speak out began sharing their own experiences with Reynolds' operation. Platform moderators leaked internal communications showing how complaints about harassment had been systematically ignored. It's bigger than just pranks, Calix realized, analyzing data patterns. They've built a whole ecosystem of exploitation. Reaction channels, drama networks, manufactured conflicts, all designed to generate engagement through human suffering. As if confirming his words, reports began coming in of coordinated attacks against the movement. Channels supporting Reynolds' network launched smear campaigns. Bot armies flooded social media with attacks against Kai and his supporters. Private information about activists began appearing on dark web forums. Classic psychological operations, Commander Valorn observed, recognizing familiar patterns. Trying to silence opposition through intimidation and information warfare. But the tide was turning. For every attack, more supporters emerged. Veterans groups organized digital security teams to protect activists. Tech workers inside major platforms began exposing how content algorithms had been manipulated. Community leaders started local initiatives to protect vulnerable populations from harassment. They don't understand what they're really fighting, Kai told Dr. Vasari as they watched the movement grow. This isn't about views or revenue anymore. It's about human dignity. Through his earpiece, Officer Kestri reported movement at the park's perimeter. More of Reynolds' content creators had arrived, but this time they came seeking amnesty, carrying hard drives and documents exposing the industry's darkest secrets. It was never supposed to be like this, a young influencer told Naya, sharing access to private industry forums. We thought we were entertaining people, but the metrics kept pushing us darker, demanding more extreme reactions, more genuine fear. As midnight approached, Aurelius Gardens hummed with activity. FBI cybercrime units coordinated with international law enforcement to track digital harassment networks. Platform safety teams worked with reformed content creators to identify exploitation patterns. Mental health professionals organized support systems for both victims and reformed harassers. Kai maintained his position near the old oak tree, observing the transformation with the same tactical awareness that had kept him alive in combat zones. But this battle wasn't about survival. It was about reshaping how humans treated each other in the digital age. You know they'll fight back harder, Commander Valorn warned, noting increased chatter about industry pushback. Reynolds and his backers have too much invested to surrender easily. Let them come, Kai replied calmly, his wheelchair positioned for optimal situational awareness. Some battles need to be fought in the open, where everyone can see the truth. Through the night, more revelations emerged. Content creators shared how they'd been trained to exploit psychological vulnerabilities. Platform employees exposed how harassment had been protected in the name of engagement. Victims found their voices, transforming pain into purpose. The hunt had evolved into something unprecedented, a movement that threatened not just individual bad actors, but an entire industry built on monetizing human suffering. And at its center, a former Navy SEAL in a wheelchair continued his quiet patrol, showing that true strength lay not in the ability to harm others, but in the courage to protect them. The pre-dawn hours at Aurelius Gardens crackled with tension as reports began flooding in of coordinated attacks against the movement. Reynolds' network had unleashed its full arsenal, not just digital harassment, but sophisticated operations designed to dismantle the growing resistance. They're targeting everyone, Naya reported, her screens displaying multiple alerts. Personal information being leaked, fake scandals manufactured, even deep fake videos trying to discredit key supporters. Kai watched the digital assault unfold with the same tactical analysis he'd once applied to battlefield operations. Through his earpiece, Officer Kestri provided updates on escalating threats against movement leaders and reformed content creators. They're not just fighting back, Commander Valorn observed, recognizing patterns in the attacks. This is a full-scale psychological operation, professional grade. The revelation sparked something in Kai's memory, tactical similarities to classified operations he'd encountered during his SEAL career. Because it's not just Reynolds, he realized. Someone with military psychological operations experience is coordinating these attacks. Dr. Vasari arrived with urgent news from her network of mental health professionals. They're targeting the most vulnerable first, she reported grimly. Former victims, reformed creators, anyone who's spoken out, using their trauma history against them. Through the growing chaos, Nixon sat with FBI cybercrime specialists, providing crucial intelligence about the industry's inner workings. The children's hospital wasn't an isolated incident, he explained, his voice heavy with guilt. There were others: nursing homes, addiction recovery centers, psychiatric facilities, places with vulnerable populations that would generate maximum reactions. Calix worked frantically at his laptop, analyzing attack patterns. It's not random, he called out, spotting familiar code signatures. These are the same tactics used in state-sponsored information warfare. Someone's providing them with military-grade capabilities. The park had become a fortress of sorts, with veterans groups providing security as more witnesses and whistleblowers arrived seeking protection. Local police coordinated with federal agents, recognizing that the threat had evolved beyond simple harassment. They're trying to split us apart, Naya observed, watching coordinated attacks target different factions within the movement, creating conflicts between advocates and reformed creators, between platform employees and safety teams. But what the attackers hadn't counted on was Kyrion Thaelar's experience with psychological warfare. Years of special operations had taught him how to recognize and counter such tactics. This is what they don't understand, he told the gathered leaders. They're using military tactics designed for breaking people apart. But we're not just individuals anymore. We're a community, united by purpose. As if proving his words, new allies emerged from unexpected quarters. Tech workers inside major platforms began exposing how content algorithms had been deliberately modified to promote conflict. Marketing executives shared internal documents showing how vulnerability metrics were used to target specific demographics. It goes beyond social media, a whistleblower from a major advertising firm revealed. They've built an entire science around exploiting human psychology for engagement. The pranks, the harassment, it's all just proof of concept for larger manipulation operations. Commander Valorn coordinated with his network of former special operations personnel, many of whom recognized the tactical signatures in the attacks. These patterns, he noted, studying data flows, they're similar to what we saw in classified influence operations. Through the morning darkness, Kai wheeled between groups, his presence a reminder of why they were fighting. His wheelchair, which Reynolds' network had seen as a symbol of weakness, had become an emblem of the movement, proof that true strength came from protecting others, not exploiting them. They think they're fighting a battle about content creation, he told Dr. Vasari as they watched new supporters arrive. But this is about something much more fundamental, the right to exist in public spaces, both physical and digital, without becoming targets for profit. The attacks intensified as dawn approached. Personal accounts were hacked, reputations were targeted, and coordinated disinformation campaigns flooded social media. But for every person they attacked, more stood up in defense. "Look at this," Naya called out, her screen showing a surprising trend. Every time they target someone, 10 more people come forward with their own stories. They're creating exactly what they're trying to prevent, a mass awakening to digital exploitation. Officer Kestri arrived with updates from various law enforcement agencies. "We're seeing a pattern," he reported. "These attacks, they're sophisticated enough to suggest state-level resources. Someone with serious connections is backing Reynolds' operation." The revelation added new urgency to their mission. This wasn't just about stopping social media harassment anymore. It was about exposing a system that had turned human vulnerability into a commodity, that had weaponized digital platforms for mass manipulation. "Sir," a young veteran approached Kai, representing a coalition of military support groups. "We've got cybersecurity teams ready to help protect the witnesses. Whatever's coming, we've got your six. Through the pre-dawn mist, more vehicles arrived at Aurelius Gardens. Not attackers this time, but investigators from multiple federal agencies. The children's hospital incident had opened doors that couldn't be closed, exposing connections between digital harassment networks and larger influence operations. They'll try to bury this, Commander Thaelar warned, watching the investigation expand. Too many powerful people involved. Too much money at stake. Let them try, Kai replied, his calm voice carrying quiet authority. Sometimes the most important battles are the ones that force hidden things into the light. The hunt had evolved into something none of them had anticipated. Not just a fight against social media harassment, but a struggle for the soul of digital culture itself. And as dawn approached, Kyrion Thaelar continued his patrol of Aurelius Gardens, knowing that the hardest part of any operation came just before victory, when the enemy, finally realizing the true nature of their opposition, unleashed everything they had in one desperate final stand. Dawn broke over Aurelius Gardens with deceptive calm, painting the sky in shades of amber that belied the gathering storm. Through his tactical communications network, Commander Thaelar reported multiple vehicles approaching the park, expensive SUVs with private security details that spoke of serious corporate involvement. Reynolds isn't coming alone, Officer Kestry warned, monitoring police channels. We're tracking arrivals from major tech companies, media conglomerates, even private military contractors. Kai positioned his wheelchair near the old oak tree, its vantage point offering clear lines of sight across the park. Years of special operations had taught him to read approaching confrontations, and everything about this one suggested a coordinated operation. They're not just trying to shut us down, Naya realized, analyzing data streams on her laptop. They're trying to set an example, show what happens to people who challenge the system. Through the morning mist, the first vehicles arrived. Reynolds emerged from a black SUV, but he wasn't in charge anymore. Behind him came figures that made several federal investigators straighten with recognition. Tech executives, media moguls, and someone Kai immediately identified as military intelligence. Colonel James Harrison, Commander Thaelar whispered, naming the man whose bearing marked him as the operation's true leader. Former Psychological Operations Command, supposedly retired but now running digital influence operations for private sector clients, Kai finished, recognizing tactical patterns he'd encountered in classified missions. The military precision in their attacks makes sense now. Dr. Vasari moved among the gathered supporters, her professional experience detecting rising tension. Whatever happens, she advised, remember why we're here. This isn't about revenge or victory. It's about protecting human dignity in the digital age. The arriving force spread out with practiced efficiency, taking positions that wouldn't look tactical to civilian eyes, but that Kai and Commander Thaelar recognized as combat formations. Private security teams established perimeters while media representatives prepared to broadcast their version of events. Last chance to end this quietly, Harrison called out, approaching with Reynolds and several executives. Your movement's made its point. Now it's time to discuss reasonable compromises. Through his earpiece, Kai heard Nixon's sharp intake of breath. The young content creator recognized Harrison from private meetings where the darker aspects of their operations had been planned. Reasonable? Naya stood, her tablet displaying evidence they'd gathered. Like the reasonable way you targeted children's hospitals? Or the reasonable algorithms designed to exploit vulnerable populations? Harrison's professional smile didn't waver. Everything we did was legal, carefully vetted by teams of lawyers who understand that digital platforms require different ethical frameworks than traditional media. Different ethical frameworks, Kai's voice carried quietly across the gathering. Interesting way to justify weaponizing human suffering for profit. The colonel's attention shifted to Kai, recognition flickering in his eyes. Senior Chief Thaelar, your record in special operations was impressive. Surely you understand that progress sometimes requires difficult decisions. I understand the difference between necessary tactical choices and exploiting the vulnerable for profit, Kai replied, his wheelchair moving with precise positioning. Something you seem to have forgotten since leaving service. Around them, the confrontation drew more attention. News crews captured tense exchanges between reformed content creators and industry representatives. Federal investigators documented interactions while platform employees turned whistleblowers continued sharing evidence. "You're threatening an entire economic ecosystem," one tech executive argued. "Millions in revenue, thousands of jobs, technological innovations, and behavioral analytics." "Behavioral analytics?" Calix interrupted, his screens displaying internal documents. "You mean like the systems designed to identify and exploit psychological vulnerabilities? To maximize trauma responses for better engagement metrics?" Harrison's composed demeanor cracked slightly. "You're out of your depth here. This isn't just about social media pranks anymore. We're developing the future of digital influence operations, teaching AI systems to understand and guide human behavior patterns. Using trauma as your teaching tools," Dr. Vasari added, stepping forward with medical records. "Creating psychological profiles of vulnerable populations to optimize harassment for maximum engagement." The morning air grew tenser as more revelations emerged. Platform moderators shared how they'd been instructed to ignore certain types of harassment reports. Marketing executives explained how psychological profiles were used to target specific demographics. Former content creators described training programs designed to escalate conflicts for better metrics. "Think about what you're risking," Harrison warned, his tone carrying years of psychological operations experience. "Your movement won't just disappear. It will be discredited, deconstructed, turned into a case study of digital hysteria." But Kyrion Thaelar had spent years fighting enemies who used fear as a weapon. His wheelchair moved with tactical precision, positioning himself between Harrison's forces and the gathered supporters. "That's where you're wrong," he replied calmly. "Because you're still thinking like a military strategist, looking for command structures to disrupt, leadership targets to neutralize. But this isn't a traditional movement anymore." As if proving his words, more supporters arrived at Aurelius Gardens, veterans groups providing security, tech workers sharing evidence, mental health professionals supporting victims, community leaders standing against digital exploitation, each person representing not just themselves, but entire networks of resistance against systemic abuse. "This ends today," Harrison announced, signaling his teams. "One way or another." The hunt had reached its critical moment. In the digital age, battlefields weren't defined by geography, but by information, and victory often came not through force but through truth. As tension mounted in Aurelius Gardens, Kyrion Thaelar prepared for one final lesson about the true nature of strength. What happened next in Aurelius Gardens would be studied in digital ethics classes, analyzed in military psychological operations courses, and remembered as the moment when the true power of human dignity stood against weaponized technology. Harrison's teams moved with military precision, private security establishing control zones while media representatives prepared their narrative. But they had fatally misunderstood the nature of their opposition. "Interesting," Kai observed calmly, his wheelchair positioned with tactical awareness. "All this force, all this preparation, just to stop people from protecting each other." Through the morning light, more supporters arrived. Not as an organized army, but as a community united by purpose. Veterans groups stood beside reformed content creators. Mental health professionals supported both victims and whistleblowers. Tech workers continued exposing system vulnerabilities. "You don't understand what you're threatening," Harrison warned, his psychological operations training evident in every word. "The future of digital engagement, behavioral prediction, social influence." "No," Kai interrupted, his voice carrying quiet authority. "You don't understand what you're defending. A system that turns human suffering into marketable content, that weaponizes vulnerability for profit." Naya's laptop displayed real-time reactions as millions watched the confrontation unfold. But unlike previous viral moments, the audience wasn't seeking entertainment. They were witnessing a fundamental choice about digital humanity. "The algorithms don't lie," a tech executive argued. "People engage with conflict. They want dramatic reactions, emotional responses." "Because you've designed systems to reward cruelty," Calix countered, sharing evidence of manipulated engagement metrics. trained both creators and audiences to see harassment as entertainment. Dr. Vasari moved among the gathered supporters, her professional eye noting not trauma now, but transformation. "This is what healing looks like," she explained to watching news crews. "When people refuse to let fear silence them, when communities stand together against exploitation." Through his tactical communications, Commander Thaelar reported more arrivals, but not reinforcements for Harrison. Federal investigators responding to evidence of corporate manipulation. State prosecutors reviewing harassment pattern data. International digital rights observers documenting systemic abuse. "It's over," Kai announced, addressing not just Harrison but the entire system he represented. "Your weapons were secrecy and shame, making targets feel isolated, powerless. But look around, no one's isolated anymore." The colonel's composed facade cracked as he realized the true nature of his opposition. His psychological operations experience had prepared him for organized resistance, for traditional power structures. But this was something else, a movement without central control, powered by human dignity and collective purpose. "Your soldiers." Harrison tried one last tactical approach. "You understand necessary sacrifices for greater goals." "We understand the difference between sacrifice and exploitation," Commander Thaelar replied, "between necessary force and calculated cruelty." Around them, Aurelius Gardens had become more than a battlefield. Reformed content creators shared their stories of manipulation and redemption. Platform moderators exposed how harassment had been protected for profit. Mental health professionals explained the real human cost of digital exploitation. "Your choice now," Kai said quietly, watching Harrison's forces recognize their position. "Continue defending a system built on suffering, or help us build something better." Reynolds, who had remained silent during the confrontation, finally stepped forward. "He's right," the former prank king admitted. "I didn't see it before, but we're not creating content. We're destroying lives for views." The transformation rippled through the gathered crowds. More industry figures broke ranks, choosing conscience over profit. Security teams stood down, recognizing the difference between protecting interests and enabling harm. "This isn't defeat," Kai explained to watching millions. "It's evolution. The digital age doesn't have to be about exploiting vulnerabilities. It can be about protecting human dignity, about using technology to lift people up instead of tearing them down." As morning brightened into day, Aurelius Gardens witnessed not just the end of a confrontation, but the beginning of a transformation. Federal agencies launched formal investigations into digital exploitation networks. Platform developers started redesigning algorithms to reward community support over conflict. Mental health professionals established support systems for both victims and reformed creators. "The hunt isn't over," Kai told Dr. Vasari as they watched positive change begin spreading through digital spaces. "But maybe now we're hunting for something better, for ways to protect rather than exploit, to heal rather than harm." The story of three pranksters targeting what they thought was an easy mark had evolved into something none of them expected. A movement that reminded millions that true strength lay not in the ability to cause pain, but in the courage to protect others from it. And in Aurelius Gardens, where it all began, Kyrion Thaelar continued his quiet patrol, his wheelchair moving with the same tactical precision he'd once used in combat. Because sometimes, the most important victories aren't won through force or viral videos, but through showing people the power of standing together against cruelty, of choosing dignity over destruction, of transforming digital spaces from battlefields into communities. The hunt had changed them all, not by breaking them down, but by showing them what they could build together. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. Click and check them.